Moving Iron Podcast is proud to be part of the Global Ag Network. The network is live, so check out globalagnetwork.com for more details and updates. Now on to the show.
Moving iron in the 21st century. Hard-working people working hard for you and me. Moving iron time and time again. Through the years you'll find us here. Moving iron.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast Markets with Angie Setzer. Angie, how you doing this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, doing great. Last leg of my vacation trip here, so I'll be headed home tonight. But I'm glad to have been here, and looks like you were just getting back from vacation. So it's that time of the year, right?
Yep. Last week was nice to get away, especially after that USDA report that came out. I was just like, I'm just going to take the week. We'll let the market kind of regroup and focus, and I'll come back next week. So it worked out well. I'm glad that I did.
Yeah, that was a crazy report. We've talked about that a few times, but it's been, anyway.
Yeah.
There was one that came out yesterday, and I guess what's your thoughts and what's your 2 cents on what came out yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, I think yesterday, if you look at the report that came out, the numbers that came out, and you look at the trade reaction, I mean, that's the most ideal situation you want to see in a market if you're hoping for higher prices eventually. So what we saw yesterday was what you would consider a negative report. The USDA came out for corn specifically. Soybeans I didn't think was that bad, but the USDA came out and actually increased old crop carryout and new crop carryout, above expectations. Now, part of that, the old crop carryout increase, I was a little bit surprised, as was trade. It came in about 140 million bushels higher than what trade was anticipating ahead of the report. And, a lot of that had to do with the fact that they lowered some feed demand and lowered export demand. I was a little bit surprised because quarterly stocks came in below expectations. So typically if quarterly stocks come in below expectations, that means that carryout projections are probably a touch higher than what they should be. I was under the opinion that, carryout expectations wouldn't need to be lowered because the last half of the marketing year exports would be slower than anticipated. So I thought we'd stay about the same. And I wasn't out of line, I don't think, because that's what most of trade was thinking. But that came in higher. So it increased beginning stocks for new crop. And then the USDA, ahead of the report yesterday, had been very vocal about the fact that they were basically going to embrace the numbers that had been put out in the acreage report. So that shouldn't have come in as a surprise to anyone. But it did, because a lot of folks were like, I can't hear you. Like, you're saying this, but you're going to do something different. So yesterday, the initial reaction was lower. I saw the numbers and I was like, crap, this is not what we needed. It's worse than what we had expected, and we were expecting a negative number. But trade was like, hey, this means nothing to us. Like, we know that we're going to resurvey acres. Everyone is still married to the idea that we're going to see this significant decrease in acreage. I'm nervous on that idea. I'm in the camp of like an 89.5 million, just simply because of the fact that I know in our neck of the woods, we got the majority of the crop planted, though planted into really poor conditions and planted late. So I would say that we had, and so maybe I'm speaking from my backyard, but I think it's pretty similar, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, South Dakota, where we planted corn, maybe even more than initially anticipated, but a lot of it went in after the 15th of June into less than ideal conditions and could be used for silage or feed, or may not even make it to maturity depending on when frost day hits. So I'm of the mindset that the planted acres could be high, but the amount of corn harvested for grain could be a record low percentage. Typically you get about 92% of corn harvested that's harvested for grain. So I don't know. At this point, we basically still have more questions than answers. The one thing that we do have coming at us that I think is going to trump anything is this heat that's supposed to develop across much of the Corn Belt next week. And so about 30% of the corn crop is expected to be expected to be pollinating across the Corn Belt next week, 48% in Iowa. So they're supposed to get 90 to 100 degree temperatures all next week, lows in the 80s. Carl and I, my husband, just had an argument about whether that means anything anymore. And I think it does. I don't think you can suddenly introduce hot and dry weather to a crop that's basically been dependent upon a significant amount of moisture once every other day for the last, however long it's been planted. Go into a hot period with somewhat dry across much of the belt, experience the heat dry, have dryness for the next 2 weeks and say, oh, well, it's not going to hurt yield. I think that might be more of what we're paying attention to now than anything. And that's not even me talking about soybeans, which I would say was somewhat bullish, though it's hard to say an 800 million bushel carryout is bullish, but we're no longer a billion. And that's with a 48.5 bushel to the acre yield when almost half the crop went in, typically in a time period that would be double crop, which tends to indicate a reduction in yield. So a lot of stories going on, no real answers, I would say. So fun times.
I agree with what you're saying. I mean, I think you're right. I think when you look at what's happened over the course of this planting season, the root structure is not there for the corn. It didn't have to go very deep, didn't have rain or anything like that. It hadn't been in the ground long enough to really get any kind of So it's I'm kind of with you. I think we're going to plant the acres. It's going to come out and they're going to go crazy over this acreage report thing. But like you said, timelines for frost and just overall yield capabilities, a lot of silage, all that kind of stuff is going to be cut for feed this year. So it's going to be.
I'm definitely of the mindset the higher the acreage number, the lower our national yield, honestly. So
through that.
I mean, we'll see. Yeah. And we had a conversation yesterday with some industry members here in the state of Michigan. And so it was basically representative of every area of the state. There was a conversation, the grain buyers. And so, everyone was basically of agreement that we probably are short here in Michigan, 20 to 25% of the acres intended. So we planted 75% of the crop, but of the acreage that was planted, 20 to 30% of that it could potentially, no one's really sure yet, because the dairies are still waiting. So that's the other problem, is that there's guys with corn that are having conversations with dairies, but they haven't committed. So, and then we had the prevented plant thing. So you claim prevented plant, you can still plant corn on that ground. You're not supposed to sell it, but, you can use it for feed. And I've never seen this level of uncertainty, and the only thing that I can look at right now is the cash market, which is on fire. But we are losing an ethanol plant in the state it's going to shut down, which doesn't surprise me. This plant has been on the verge of shutdown even in good times. So that is one thing that is negative. I had a hog feeder tell me yesterday that he was going to replace his corn needs with wheat. I don't think he's really actively checked what the wheat market looks like here in the state. I think he thinks that he can buy it at, like today's price, which isn't indicative of what actually is going on down the road, especially with the short crop year. Elevators are going to want to own wheat. Harvest basis is probably going to be strong overs. So there's just a lot of different factors at play. And so I'm glad I like my job, because I would be in trouble if I didn't, I guess. It's going to be an interesting year.
Yep. Okay, so let's bounce over here. So there's been some kind of, back page news on the African swine fever issue in China. A lot of stuff going on there that have kind of really getting pushed to the back burner, I feel like. And when I go to look up data about it, 50% number's been tossed around quite a bit as far as what the herd actually has been culled down to now. And it sounds like it's actually gotten worse since the last time we talked about this. China's been buying pigs everywhere in the world as fast as they can buy them, not so much from the U.S., obviously, with what we have going on here. They've been buying corn from Brazil at a record pace, and it's just been taking off like crazy. So those supplies are about to start running out, and the U.S. is going to be the only game in town here before too long with really any real supply of soybeans or corn or pigs or whatever it is that they're buying. So I guess what's your thought on that, and how do you see that affecting the market long term.
Yeah, I mean, everyone keeps talking about the fact that you can't feed dead pigs. So obviously you're going to see a decrease in demand when it comes to corn and soybeans. And yeah, I mean, surprise, China's not being truthful about what's taking place. I think the biggest concern is if we see a continuation of the spread. Vietnam has said that they're very close to a vaccine or some sort of eradication. I think short term, it's exceptionally negative, obviously. I mean, we're seeing that Chinese imports of soybeans were down in the month of the month of June by like 8% versus a year ago. Brazil has production capacity. The U.S. has production capacity, but obviously the whole trade war thing. But even with that, they're not importing as much because they don't think they need to feed. However, eventually you're going to figure out a way to rebuild the herd, whether it is you have to incentivize it, right? But right now you don't want these backyard herds. So obviously these backyard herds are where the trouble had started. They're where the trouble is probably going to continue. So I think what you see happen in China is actually long-term bullish demand. And maybe I'm crazy. I'm probably the only I haven't seen anyone really come out and say this. So I'm sure everyone will tell me how crazy I am in that. But I think what you're going to see is a modernization of China's hog production, kind of forced because of this disease issue. Now, does it take 5 years? It could. But where you're going to see an increase in biosecurity and a desire to feed a ration similar to what we're seeing here in the U.S. Something that's more safe, no longer these backyard herds. I think what you're going to see is a significant change in Chinese food production, stemming from this, because right now you're seeing an increase in food inflation. I just read an article the other day about a poultry company is expecting almost a 1,500% increase in profit versus a year ago because they have chickens, these white boiler chickens, and so it is a problem. It is a huge problem. It's going to be a problem, and I'm not sure how long it takes for it to go away. The biggest concern is if it continues to spread, and obviously if it hits here. There is some conversation that we could see China remove the 50% tariff they have on U.S. pork right now. So that could be beneficial to us. We're really kind of depending on that increase in market. So I think at this point, we go back to the more unknowns than knowns. The one known that we have is that half their hog herd has been wiped out. The one positive when it comes down to it is it's a disease that has hit hogs. Hogs can regenerate population very quickly. Yeah. You're looking at the ability to have the average sow had 11 piglets in the last Hogs and Pigs report. So you have 11 piglets in a sow. It takes 8 months to be able to breed a sow, I believe, maybe a year. It takes like 6 months to feed a pig to be ready to come to market, maybe 8 months. You know what I mean? These are rough estimates. But it's not like in cattle. When we had the BSE issue and all of these other things in cattle, it takes you 18 months to be able to get a steer ready. It takes you a year and a half to be able to breed a heifer, all of these things. So I think the one thing that is beneficial is at least it's hitting the hog population, where like we saw in the U.S. here, we increased our available hog supply from December to June at a record pace because we thought we would be exporting to China by now. So I don't know, a lot of moving pieces. I think short term, very negative, more of a bearish influence, but long term, I think it creates a modernization of the global hog herd that may not be there at this point, and that will increase, meal feeding and other components to a ration, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think pigs can reproduce themselves pretty quick for a mammal. They reproduce like rats.
They're rabbits. They're the rabbit of the deliciousness world. I don't know.
That's right.
I've never ate a rabbit, and I won't. I hope Stu doesn't hear that. My kitchen rabbit. I hope he.
Not that bad. Pretty good.
So.
All right, Angie. Okay, good.
Yeah, I've heard. I've just never tried it.
Yeah. Nope. I hear you. All right. Well, Angie, good stuff as usual. If people want to reach out to you, pick your brain about some stuff that's going on, what's the best way to do that?
You can find me on Twitter at Goddess of Grain, or you can email me at asetzer@citizenselevator.com.
Also, check out Angie's podcast on the Global Ag Network called Girls Talk Ag. It's a very enlightening conversation with a group of women that know ag. So check that out on the Global Ag Network. So, Angie, take care of yourself. We'll talk to you again next week.
You too. Have a good one.
All right.
Thanks for listening to this edition of the Moving Iron Podcast, now part of the Global Ag Network. If you'd like to continue any of these conversations, you can hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Moving Iron LLC. You can also send me an email at movingironpodcast@movingironpodcast.com. You can also visit the Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel and watch Market Roundup with Chip Nellinger, Sean Hackett, and Angie Setzer. Also, Tax News with Glenn Birnbaum. Please visit movingironllc.com. Here you can find information, details, and updates for the 2019 Moving Iron Summit in Nashville, Tennessee. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can leave a review and subscribe at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, TuneIn Radio, SoundCloud, and globalagnetwork.com. So until next time, let's go move some iron. This is Casey Seymour. Out.
Moving iron in the 21st century. Hard-working people working hard for you and me. Moving iron time and time again. Through the years you'll find us here.